You're ever on a sales call and you're thinking about what to say next and you're just blanking out. Usually whenever this would happen to me, it would be when I'm handling objections. Sometimes some people have told me it's happened to them when they're in the discovery. They're trying to remember what questions they're supposed to ask. When they get an objection, they're trying to remember, the specific words they're supposed to say to handle that objection. They're just blanking out with what should come next. What should they do in that moment? And I want to talk a little bit about why that happens, but more so how to avoid that happening and how to learn sales in a way that allows you to train your subconscious so that it naturally says the right thing to say next. And not that there's any one specific right thing, but what you want to do is get to a point that when you're in your flow state, you're not freezing up because you're so focused on whatever it is on your script or whatever it is your trainer told you to say when this objection came up. You're not trying to recall that information. You're naturally pulling from that information to just continue the conversation in a way that feels and comes across as natural for you. So what happens for most people, the reason why they're blanking out is based on how they train, how they learn sales. And typically this is what happens. They spend 90% of the time listening to their bad calls, listening to what not to say. They bring their call recordings to their trainer. They want to show them the worst calls. And the trainer spends all this time picking apart their bad calls and pointing out, this is where you went wrong. This is what you should do instead. This is where you went wrong. This is what you should do instead. This is where you went wrong. This is what you should do instead. And because they're spending so much time only listening to and focusing on the bad, that's what your subconscious is learning. You got to understand, your brain doesn't really know the difference between learned memory and experienced memory. And what I mean by that is, if you are listening to something over and over and over again, your brain is going to start to conflate that with your experience. And if we all know, if you do something over and over and over again, it's going to be what trains your muscle memory to do when you start to blank out, right? If your first reaction to whatever it is, like if your first reaction to anything is something else, like let's say whenever I pick up, I don't know what I got here. Whenever I pick up this SD card, my next reaction is always, first thing I do every time I sit down at this desk is I pick up this SD card, and the next thing I do is I grab my mouse. That's going to become a habit, and that's going to be something I naturally do. And the days when I'm just rushing in, I'm not really thinking, and I sit down here, the first thing I'm going to always do is pick up this SD card. And the next thing I'm always going to do, most likely, if I'm not really thinking about it, is subconsciously pick up my mouse. Now, they did studies, and you'll actually find that there's not really much of a difference between doing that and watching that. So now if I watched a video of myself always picking up an SD card and picking up the mouse afterwards, that is also going to train my subconscious in a way that I might start to pick up that habit in real life, even though I'm not actually doing it. I'm just watching it. So what I mean to say is, if you spend most of your time listening to what sucks, listening to where you went wrong, listening to where your calls were bad, when you get to those moments in the call where you're about to blank out, the first thing on your mind is not going to be what your trainer said to do. It's going to be what you heard yourself doing, what you remember yourself doing. And that is, if you watch nothing but bad, is going to be more of the bad, right? Like by listening to your bad calls over and over again, you are training yourself to do more of the same. So to change this, one, this is not me saying to never listen to your bad calls. You have to understand the purpose for it. You listen to the call, you find what to change, and then you spend all of your time either one, practicing that change so you can build the muscle memory. And you should do both of these. You should practice that change over and over and over again, more than you heard the bad. And then if you have great calls where you did do that change, or if you have other people's calls to listen to where they are doing an exemplary job, a really good job, you should spend the bulk of your time listening to that over and over and over again. It should be like a 80-20. 20% of the time, listen to your bad calls, but it's only just long enough to find the correction, then turn it off. And the rest of your time should just be focused listening to good calls where it's good examples, and also practicing what's good, doing mock calls, role plays, all of those things, to where you're putting it in your mind. When your mind goes blank, when you don't know what to say next, your natural thing to say next is going to be what's good, because your brain is full with so much memory and history of what the best response was in those moments. And I did this for tons of my sales calls. This helped me a lot, where I would just be doing other types of work. Maybe I'm just typing stuff, follow up, and I would just play a great sales call in the background where I crushed it, or another person on the team who's really crushing it. I would just play them handling objections in the background. I would just play them doing discovery in the background. And the biggest thing for me was the objection side, like just being able to naturally help people overcome their fears to move forward. So that's what I would mostly just play in the background, people handling objections, where those objections or those objection handles led to a sale. And I would play that in the background while I was doing other work, while I was sending emails, while I was writing text messages, all of those things. And what started to happen, what I just naturally noticed, was I would be on calls and then I would get the same objection. And the first thing to my mind was the exact way that person handled it that led to the sale. And then I would just use it, and then it would lead to the sale, right? And it was so natural, so smooth. I didn't freeze up. And that was because your body and your mind is going to recall the thing it remembers the most, which is whatever you feed it the most. Stop feeding it you fumbling. Stop feeding it you stumbling. Stop feeding it you not knowing what to do or doing a bad call. If you listen to your bad calls too much, that's what you're training yourself to do more of. Made a huge difference for me. And if you haven't done this, it might make a huge, huge difference for you. I promise you, this could be a game changer. There's a lot of different books that talk more about this. I think there's one called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, and then Psycho-Cybernetics. Those are two pretty good books. I don't remember the name of the authors right now, but if you read those two books, it talks a lot about, just imagined memory and, active memory. It's really good books on this kind of stuff. And once I read it, tested those things out, a little bit of trial and error, it really helped in my sales calls. So try it for yourselves. Hopefully this helps some of you. I'll see you guys in the next video.